Matter is anything that takes up space and has mass or a weight. And we generally talk about matter in terms of what form it's in. So it's either a solid or a liquid or a gas. It doesn't really matter what state it's in. It occupies space and it has mass, then it's matter. Energy is the ability to do some kind of work. So a lot of the work in the body is actually chemicals, and we'll talk about how that works, but there's energy stored within a chemical that can be released to do different kinds of work. You can also have electrical energy, which your body also uses, and it's a charge differential that can be utilized to do work. There is mechanical energy. An example of that are your muscles contracting actually shortens something to do work, or radiant energy, which we're really not going to talk much about in this class. So matter is really composed of elements, which are the fundamental units of matter. And most of the human body is made of 4 key elements: carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and nitrogen. All of the larger structures that you find in your body are built from those key elements. Elements are actually atoms, and atoms form the building blocks of those key elements. Within an atom, they have a particular structure where they have a nucleus, and the nucleus is composed of particles, protons, which have a positive charge, and neutrons, which don't have a charge. And then outside the nucleus, there are electrons that have a negative charge. Any given element has a particular arrangement of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Now you can combine several of those atoms together, and when you combine them together, they're called a molecule. Now the strict definition of a molecule is that it's 2 of the same atom, so 2 oxygen atoms together would make an oxygen molecule. And a compound is molecules that have different atoms together. What's important to know that all compounds, by our way of using the terms, are actually molecules. So we'll talk about molecules throughout this course, and we're talking about combinations of different atoms. The electrons that go around the outside of an atom occupy specific energy levels called electron shells. The ones closest to the nucleus are really attracted to the positive protons in the nucleus, but the very outside electrons can actually have interactions with each other, and those interactions of those outermost electrons with other atoms are called bonds. Some kind of atoms have full what are called valence shells or outer shells. In that case, all of the electrons are very happy being where they are, and they don't form any kind of bonds. But if the outer electron valence shells are not completely full, that atom isn't completely happy, and it's going to be trying to trade electrons in one way or another to make a bond. So, for example, here you see hydrogen has 1 electron, little black dot, in the outer shell, but it really isn't happy with just 1 electron. It needs another electron. So it's going to try to work a deal with another atom to get happy, to get that electron it wants. So it could either give away the electron it has, or it could steal an electron from something else. And either stealing, giving away, or sharing electrons are ways in which bonds can form. Every atom has different numbers of electrons in their outer shell, so it has slightly different characteristics in the kinds of bonds it's capable of forming. So when atoms are united by sharing electrons or by some other kind of attraction due to what the electrons have done, it's called a bond. When the atoms dissociate from the other atoms that they were sharing electrons with or attracted to, we say the chemical bond was broken. So forming chemical bonds or breaking chemical bonds is a lot about what the electrons are doing. So we'll talk about some of the most common kinds of bonds. One is an ionic bond. In an ionic bond, the atoms have either completely given away an electron or completely stolen an electron. When an atom completely gives away an electron, it gave away something that was negatively charged. So on balance, that atom will be positive, and we call it a cation. If it stole an electron from another atom, now it's got an extra negative charge, so it's going to be negative, and we call that an anion. So we make ions. Ions are made by either giving away or stealing electrons, and when they give away or steal an electron, it makes them charged either positively or negatively. Those positive and negative charges are attracted to each other, and those attractions form ionic bonds. Let me give you an example. Sodium is a cation, a positively charged ion, and chloride is a negatively charged ion. It always gets an electron. The positively charged sodium is attracted to the negatively charged chloride, and they form an ionic bond that makes sodium chloride salt. A lot of atoms, though, aren't strong enough to either completely steal an electron or completely give away an electron. So they kind of end up sharing electrons. And if they share electrons in a way that they make each other happy, they have the right number of electrons, we call that a covalent bond. So covalent bonds are, instead of completely stealing or completely giving away an electron, we're just going to share that electron. Many of the molecules in your body that we're going to talk about shortly are made by covalent bonds, by the sharing of electrons. This is very common in your body. So here's examples of covalent bonds. At the top, you can see you have two hydrogen atoms. Neither one has the two electrons that they need. If they get together, they can share those two electrons, and both of them are happy. Both of them have the two electrons they need. Same with oxygen. In this case, the outer shell has to have 8 electrons. And so if they share 2 sets of electrons, each one can have 8 electrons and be happy. You can have 2 different kinds of covalent bonds. In one kind, if both of the atoms can equally pull on the electrons so that the electrons are shared completely equally between the two, that's called a non-polar covalent bond. In that case, because the electrons are totally evenly shared, there's no charge on the molecule, and it's said to be hydrophobic. Hydrophobic means afraid of water, and pretty much all things that have the hydrophobic characteristic don't mix well with water. They try to stay as far away from water as they can. If the electrons are not shared equally, one of the atoms can pull more strongly on the electrons than the other, you end up in the situation like water where the oxygen has much better pull and it has a slight negative charge, not a complete negative charge, it's not an anion, but a slight negative charge. So it has more of the electrons and it leaves the water molecule partially charged. We say then that they're hydrophilic, and anything that has a partial charge, a polar covalent bond like that, will get along really well with water, be able to mix really easily with water. And the last kind of chemical bond that we'll really talk about are hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds are pretty weak, but if you get enough of them, they can really do some incredibly powerful things in your body. For example, the DNA molecules in the middle of your cells, they're all held together by hydrogen bonds. There's enough hydrogen bonds that it's able to hold the molecule really tightly together. All of the proteins in your body are held in their correct shape by hydrogen bonds. A hydrogen bond is when a partial negative charge is attracted to a partial positive charge. It's not strong charges like an ionic bond, but they're little weak attractions that allow molecules to be attracted to each other and kind of held by partial charges together. We'll talk about a lot of different kinds of reactions, but the general form of reactions they pretty much go into general categories. So one category is a synthesis reaction, where you take any individual reactant and put them together into a bigger reactant. For example, you could take a glucose molecule and another glucose molecule and put them together to make a molecule that is a disaccharide, has two glucoses. When you add two or more molecules together, that's called a synthesis reaction. The opposite of that is a decomposition reaction or a hydrolysis reaction, and that's where you've taken a longer molecule and breaking it down into smaller pieces. Pretty much the opposite of a synthesis reaction. So here's an example of a synthesis reaction where I take individual amino acids and I put them together to make a protein. Or I could take individual sugars and put them together to make a long chain sugar. And then a decomposition reaction is where I take a long chain molecule and break it down into little pieces. You can also have exchange reactions where I take a molecule that has a couple of parts and I trade those parts. That's considered to be an exchange, where you're switching parts between molecules.